Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna keep watching the Napoleonic War series from Extra History TV. This is Napoleon's Spanish Ulcer. It's Spain 1809 to 1811. Very interesting to see how it goes for Napoleon in Spain. I mean, the fighting in Spain in the beginning was very, it went back and forth, but it looked like France was like halfway. Napoleon was halfway of taking Spain, right? He was kicked out of Portugal, right? We're gonna see what's gonna happen. All right, you can subscribe if you want, leave a like if you want, leave a dislike if you want. Just comment down below what I can do to make this better, and let's go. Okay. This war was my downfall. What? Makes sense?
In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, was at the height of his power. He had just won another crushing victory against Austria at Wagram and imposed a humiliating peace treaty. But the war he'd started in Spain and Portugal, with his ill-judged invasion the previous year,
I mean, yeah, look at that. He's sort of halfway, right? It looks like he has Madrid, but you never know. Right? Soult is in Portugal. Okay, so he's in Portugal. He has 2 cities under siege. It looks like he's moving south and west, but okay. Napoleon said it was his downfall, so let's see.
continued to rage. Napoleon had placed his own brother, Joseph, on the Spanish throne, uniting a proud country against him.
King of Spain in 5 years, okay.
His troops had dealt ruthlessly with popular uprisings,
Yep.
while routing a succession of Spanish armies. In February 1809, Marshal Lannes overcame the heroic defence of Zaragoza in a brutal siege that cost 54,000 Spanish lives and 10,000 French.
Is that a priest? No. Yeah, they're a priest, right? Wow. But who are they hitting? The priest with the cross that's hitting, is he hitting the guy who is on the floor with the gun, or is he hitting the French soldier? Wow, look at this. Brutal. Look at this. Is it at a church they're attacking? Yikes.
But still, the Spanish and Portuguese remained defiant.
Yep.
And
I mean,
3 months after their escape from Coruña, the British were back. In April, Sir Arthur Wellesley landed in Lisbon to lead a small Anglo-Portuguese army.
And again, the British and Portuguese alliance is called the Old Alliance, right? So these law would have been, you see, Portugal is, Soult has Portugal in Porto, but that's about it. So it's cut off in half-ish, right? Or in the north, he got the north, right? Napoleon got the north of Portugal, but the rest of Portugal is sort of safe, right? I mean, it's an interesting alliance, though, between the Portuguese and the British, right? It's weird, but it's not weird, right? Portugal is on the coast, so it makes sense. On the coast of the peninsula, right? So it makes sense.
British redcoats would fight alongside Portuguese troops, who, with the help of British training, would soon prove themselves highly effective.
Okay, that's nice.
3 weeks after arriving in Portugal, Wellesley moved against Marshal Soult's 2nd Corps,
It makes sense.
which had recently taken Porto. Soult and his troops, preoccupied with plundering the region, had no warning of the British advance, and were soon in headlong retreat, back through the mountains into Spain.
Amateur, right? Pretty. Spain is a country where small armies are defeated and large armies starve. What, Henry?
Having secured Portugal
Makes sense.
for the time being, Wellesley planned a joint campaign with General Cuesta, commanding the Spanish army of Extremadura.
What?
On the 10th of July, the two commanders met at Casas de Miravete to discuss strategy. Relations between these two allies were not straightforward. Spain and Britain had a long history of conflict.
Yeah.
The Spanish were deeply suspicious of British intentions in
Yes.
Spain, while the British had a low opinion of the Spanish army,
Yeah.
which they considered poorly trained and badly led.
I mean, let's think of context here, right? With the Brits and Spaniards, right? So the Brits got Gibraltar, took it or was given it by Spain during the Spanish succession, right? And before that even, I think, or maybe after, whatever, the 7 Years' War, the Brits were against Spain. Or were they? Maybe I'm getting my alliances here mixed up. Maybe they were on the Brit side. I don't know. Whatever. But in North America, though, the Spaniards, French, they were sort of against the British colonies, Canada, sort of, right? So you saw a lot of fighting there in between. And during the American Revolution, Spain, France, Netherlands, or Holland sent a lot of help and manpower to the Americans, or the colonial Brits, right, to fight the British army. So, and it's not that long ago, like 30 years ago, right? 35 years ago, whatever. So context important here, right? Okay, let's go.
Wellesley's request to take over command of Spanish forces was rejected.
Yeah.
But the generals agreed to a joint advance up the Tagus Valley towards Madrid.
Let's do a prediction here, right? About this alliance between Portugal, Spain, and Britain. The alliance between, what was it, during Austerlitz, right? The Austrians, the Russians. It was great, but they didn't coordinate, right? And then they just got outplayed. They were slow, they didn't agree probably, right? And then the same thing with Prussia. When Prussia entered the war, Prussia didn't talk with their allies about what they were going to do. They just attacked, right? So coordination here is very important. Communication about what you're going to do, where are you men, how much resources you have, which road you're going to take. This is going to be difficult. Is pride going to go against duty? I don't know. Let's see.
To be supported by General Venegas, advancing from La Mancha. In the face of their advance, Marshal Victor's First Corps withdrew to Talavera, where he was joined by King Joseph and General Sebastiani's Fourth Corps.
Okay.
The French plan was for Joseph's army to defend Madrid, while Marshal Soult led 3 corps down from the north to get behind and trap the Anglo-Spanish forces.
Looks like a pretty normal, or not normal, but standard Napoleonic tactic, right? Keep the big forces occupied by attacking you, and then a bigger force comes around and attacks them on their flank. It's not very... I mean, Napoleon would have had a single force attacking him, or two, divide them and then conquer. A little different here. This is a very normal military strategy overall, right? Just get on their flanks. But okay.
But Joseph, worried by Soult's slow progress and General Venegas's advance on Madrid, decided to attack at Talavera.
30,000 British troops, some 150 leagues from the sea, against 100,000 of the best troops in the world. My God.
The Battle of Talavera saw British infantry bear the brunt of the French assault.
Wow. I mean, it's a little bit not true, right? July 1809 has Napoleon taking the best troops out of Spain to fight the Austrians. I think so, right? So it's not the 100,000 best troops in the world. Maybe. But they're led by King Joseph, is he a good military strategist or tactician? Maybe not. Salt, he was plundering, and then the Brits came and he escaped Portugal, so let's see.
They stood firm.
Look at the
repelled
epic.
the enemy with disciplined musket fire and bayonet charges.
Yeah, they're professional.
Talavera was a small battle compared to the great clashes fought that year in Austria.
Yep.
But it proved that under Wellesley, Britain's small, well-drilled army was a force to be reckoned with.
Wow, look at that. The Spanish, okay, Spanish didn't lose that much. I don't know how many troops they had. 5,000 Brits, 7,000 French. That's gotta sting. But if the French had 100,000 and the Brits had 30,000 or 60,000, whatever, they held their line. Okay, respect.
Even though in the short term, victory achieved little. Warned of Soult's approach from captured dispatches, the victorious Anglo-Spanish army retreated.
Makes
while
sense.
King Joseph and 4th Corps marched against Venegas' army, which they smashed at the Battle of Almonacid.
Okay, looks pretty decent.
That autumn, the Supreme Junta in Seville, Free Spain's effective government, raised 2 new armies for another attempt to liberate Madrid, planning to converge on the capital from north and south.
Looks like a decent strategy.
But Wellesley, ennobled as Viscount Wellington for his victory at Talavera, had been so disgusted by the lack of Spanish cooperation that summer that he refused to risk his army.
Wow. But I mean, I understand Wellesley's point. Okay, they haven't communicated with you that much, he says. But it could also be on Wellesley's part to say that you want that. I don't know. Okay.
Predictably, Spain's inexperienced armies met with disaster. At Ocaña, they suffered their biggest defeat of the war,
Yeah.
when a smaller force under Marshal Soult routed the Spanish army,
Wow.
taking 14,000
Oh
prisoners
my.
and 50 cannon.
Wow.
A week later, the army of the left was heavily defeated at Alba de Tormes.
Okay.
There was more bad news when Girona fell to the French after an epic 7-month siege.
Wow. 7 months.
The Supreme Junta's plans to retake Madrid were in tatters, and southern Spain was now wide open to French attack.
Yep. 1810. Okay, that was 1809. Wow. My object is not to obtain submission by force, but to dispel illusions. I will arrive at a union of hearts. Joseph Bonaparte.
In January 1810, King Joseph marched south with an army of 60,000 men. Spanish resistance evaporated.
Yeah.
Spain's Supreme Junta was overthrown in a coup, as Córdoba and Seville fell without a fight.
Wow.
Joseph, who still hoped to win over the Spanish with his progressive reforms, was welcomed by many as a saviour from anarchy. Only Cadiz held out, its defences reinforced by a British naval squadron,
Makes
and
sense.
was besieged by Victor's 1st Corps. Meanwhile, Napoleon sent Marshal Massena to Spain with 65,000
Wow.
reinforcements. He was reckoned one of Napoleon's best marshals, and had just been made Prince of Essling for his heroics in the recent war against Austria.
Oh yeah. I still don't understand. How can they just 60,000 men, or probably boys, right? But still, where do you get these? Where do you get these boys or men, right? Where? How do you train them that fast? Wow, it's just interesting. I don't understand all the details in it, right? But it's very interesting. Okay, so it looks like Napoleon's gonna take Spain, but it doesn't look like it. He has driven a wedge between eastern Spain and Galicia, Spain, and Portugal, right? But is this too little, too late? Is it? Okay, let's see.
Massena was to lead a third French invasion of Portugal, take Lisbon and chase the British back into the sea.
A third invasion.
He laid siege to Ciudad Rodrigo, a fortified city controlling one of the main routes into Portugal.
Makes sense.
Which surrendered after 2 weeks' bombardment.
Wow.
Wellington, with only 33,000 men to face Massena's 50,000, retreated.
Is he gonna escape again?
Crossed the Portuguese frontier and besieged Almeida.
Wow. Look at that.
After just 13 hours of bombardment, a lucky French shot hit the Portuguese magazine.
Oh my.
70 tons of gunpowder went up in a devastating explosion.
I mean, in history, lucky shots are not commonplace, but they do occur, and when they occur, they achieve great victory, whatever. You succeeded in what your mission was, right? This is unbelievable. And I mean, this painting, how amazing. I mean, it looks pretty bad with the trees and all that, but look at the buildings, look at the explosion, the troops, the fortifications. It's amazing. Wow.
That made all further resistance useless. It was a serious blow to Wellington, who'd been relying on Almeida's strong defences to buy him time.
Yep.
At Busaco, he found a strong defensive position and made a stand.
Okay.
Massena's uphill frontal attack failed, at a cost of 4,000 casualties.
Oof.
But the next day, the French found a way to outflank Wellington's position, and his retreat continued. As Massena's army neared Lisbon, his scouts reported something completely unexpected.
Wow.
Stretching across the Lisbon Peninsula, protecting the city from attack, they found a new chain of fortifications in 2 major lines.
That's pretty important and interesting. Right? Oh, there's some Spanish troops there as well. This was very smart of the Portuguese and Brits, right? They probably built these defenses before the invasion, when they retook Portugal, right? Because they knew that their escape route will probably be Lisbon, right? It's important to have defensive lines, right? Especially in Napoleonic wars, because you never know. It's pretty hard to outflank here, right? On this peninsula, right? Very important, very cool.
Known as the Lines of Torres Vedras, the British and Portuguese had been constructing these defences for more than a year.
Wow, smart.
Now the lines bristled with more than 100 forts, redoubts and batteries, manned by 30,000 troops and 250 guns.
Oh my.
Massena soon discovered the lines were far too strong for him to attack.
Yeah.
What's more, a scorched earth strategy had stripped the surrounding countryside of anything that might help the French.
Makes sense.
While Portuguese partisans attacked French supply columns as they struggled through the mountains to reach Massena's army. Massena faced a grim predicament.
So he is basically under siege as well as Wellington, right? This is pretty smart. I mean, yeah, this is smart. I mean, if you're under siege, you're not under siege. You have a strong defensive line, but technically a siege, right? But the Brits have the escape route through the ocean, right? So that shouldn't be a problem. But you harass your enemy that's doing attacks on your defensive position, and that's even better. Nice.
Starved of supplies, too weak to attack, unwilling to retreat. But throughout this standoff, it was Portuguese peasants who suffered most of all.
As always.
When their villages and farms were burned, many took refuge in Lisbon.
Uh-oh.
Where thousands died of starvation
and
disease.
Yeah. Okay, that was 1810. Alright, 1811. So, Prince of Essling, you are no longer Massena. Uh-oh.
Back in France, Napoleon had been preoccupied with his divorce from the Empress Josephine, and then a new marriage to Archduchess Marie-Louise, daughter of the Emperor of Austria.
See? I thought Napoleon, when he was coronated, said that he was the revolution. And what was the French Revolution about? I mean, almost all revolutionaries, or all the sort of factions of the revolution, were against either full power of the monarchy, or they were for like a monarchy that the Brits have, right? A constitutional monarchy, right? But looks like Napoleon is playing the monarchy game, right? Like I said in one episode, I don't know which one it was, right? But he gave titles to his friends and family, which a monarch does. He is now marrying a monarch, right? What was it? The Austrian's daughter or niece? Whatever. Right? He's playing the monarchy game. That I thought that was the revolution's sort of pushback against the monarchy, but okay. It is that you become what you're fighting against, right? Sooner or later, you're going to become what you were fighting against in the beginning. Okay.
She was now expecting their first child. Nevertheless, from Paris, Napoleon sent frequent orders to his marshals in Spain and Portugal, urging them to take more aggressive action.
Makes sense.
But when these orders arrived weeks later, they were usually out of date, and showed little understanding of the problems his marshals faced.
That sounds like a very Napoleon thing to do, right? Napoleon, because this is 1811, so it's of course later in his life, but Napoleon was one of them that was always near the fighting and knew the terrain, knew his enemy, right? He's given this to his brother Joseph and giving command over him, and then he's giving out command weeks after he had looked at the maps. Like, very un-Napoleon of him, but again, you become, when you play the monarchy game, you can't be at the battlefield for some reason.
He now ordered Soult, based in Andalusia, to go on the offensive to draw enemy forces away from Lisbon.
Makes sense.
So Massena could take the city. Soult laid siege to Badajoz, a fortified city that controlled the southern route into Portugal. When 12,000 men of the army of Extremadura marched to its relief, they were routed by Soult, after which the city tamely surrendered, giving up 8,000 prisoners and vast quantities of stores.
Wow,
it was another heavy blow to Spain's armed forces. But remarkably, despite such disasters and their many blundering generals, the Spanish troops remained willing to fight, the courage of the rank and file undimmed.
Okay, that's
Victor's First Corps, besieging Cadiz, had now been so weakened to support other operations that the Anglo-Spanish garrison decided to attack. The Allies landed along the coast to strike at the French siege lines from the rear. But they were ambushed by the French at Barossa. Despite heavy losses, the Anglo-Portuguese rearguard fought off the enemy. But a furious falling out between British commander Sir Thomas Graham and his Spanish counterpart General La Peña threw away any advantage.
Wow, bad
Soult,
coordination.
alarmed at these developments, marched back to Andalusia. Meanwhile, Massena, out of food and with no prospect of reinforcement, had no option but to retreat.
Makes sense.
Wellington's army pursued, discovering evidence of several appalling atrocities committed by the French against Portuguese villagers.
Sadly.
There were running battles with the French rearguard, brilliantly commanded by Marshal Ney, until he was sacked by Massena for criticizing his leadership.
That's not good. I don't. That's a pretty bad decision. If you, as a leader, decides to retreat or pull back after you've been under siege and you have been besieging an enemy force, and then you fire someone who's saying that maybe you shouldn't lead us if you can't give us a sort of victory, or right, that just shows that you're not a good leader in a sense, right? It's pretty bad.
Having chased the French out of Portugal, Wellington besieged Almeida. Massena's army, now rested and reinforced, marched to its aid. The two armies clashed again at Fuentes de Oñoro. In 2 days of heavy fighting, Massena failed to break through Wellington's position to relieve Almeida. The fortress fell the next week, but to Wellington's fury, British bungling allowed most of the French garrison to escape.
Uh-oh.
Massena had lost 25,000 men in Portugal. Now he'd lost Almeida too, and a string of bad decisions, not least to bring his mistress with him on campaign, had cost him the respect of his officers.
Makes sense. Maybe he was better in another position, right? Maybe he wasn't the best suited for that position of leading an army, right? Maybe he was better at chief of staff, right? Maybe, I don't know. It looks like he's decent, but it's just something about him, right? I don't know.
The Marshal, whom Napoleon had once nicknamed the Dear Child of Victory, was recalled to France in disgrace, never to hold senior command again.
Yikes.
Napoleon sent Marshal Marmont to replace him.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Marshal Beresford, the British commander of Portugal's army, was sent to retake Badajoz with 20,000 British and Portuguese troops. When Soult approached with a relief force, Beresford marched to meet him at Albuera. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war.
Is that children?
Around 6,000 casualties on each side.
Wow.
With more than a third of the British infantry killed, wounded or captured.
Those on the left, are those two children? Or are they just short? No, they're probably 16, right? Yeah. Okay. I mean, imagine being drummers, just drumming away and walking towards the enemy. A lot of guts. Respect.
Marshal Soult declared,
"There is no beating these troops, in spite of their generals. I always thought they were bad soldiers. Now I'm sure of it. I had turned their right, pierced their center, and everywhere victory was mine. But they didn't know how to run."
Soult had been checked, but he was determined to save Badajoz. The newly arrived Marshal Marmont marched to his aid, and they advanced again.
Makes sense.
This combined army forced the British to abandon the siege. But when Wellington withdrew to a strong defensive position across the Portuguese border, Soult and Marmont did not pursue.
Okay.
French commanders in Spain had learned grudging respect for Wellington and for the steadiness of his troops. For now, the war in Spain had entered stalemate.
Uh-oh. General's fortune, officers' ruin, soldiers' death. Wow. Wow.
While British, French and Spanish armies crisscrossed Spain and Portugal, another war was fought every day in the mountains, hills and woods.
Okay.
From 1808, Spanish and Portuguese civilians, militias and ex-soldiers began taking up arms against the hated French invader.
Makes sense.
They waged a war of ambushes and hit-and-run raids, known in Spanish as La Guerrilla,
Okay.
the Little War. Its fighters became known in English as guerrillas.
Is that where it's from? Is that where guerrilla fighting is from? Huh, that's pretty cool. I mean, guerrilla fighting has always been part of human... It's probably part of animal kingdom as well, but we humans have done this to each other for a long time. It's not a new thing. Maybe the name is new. The fighting, not so much. Hit and run tactics, not that uncommon. But it's pretty cool if it came up from the Napoleonic Wars in Spain. That's pretty cool. But it makes sense that ex-soldiers, civilians, militia... I mean, what were they going to do? They couldn't fight the French head on because a professional army would probably destroy you. So you hide between rocks, in the trees, right? And shoot a couple of shots and run away, right? Doesn't sound that honorable, but doesn't matter because your point is to drive them away. So, okay.
Britain's Royal Navy supplied vital weapons, stores and money,
Makes sense.
often landing them behind enemy lines.
Wow.
Much of Spain's rugged countryside fell under the control of the guerrillas.
That makes sense.
North of Madrid, Juan Martín Díez, an ex-soldier known as El Empecinado, the Stubborn, led a guerrilla band 6,000 strong.
Wow.
In Navarre, Espoz y Mina, a former peasant, ran a highly organised band that caused havoc for the French, capturing convoys and couriers on the strategic Burgos-Bayonne road,
Very
and
important.
branding Viva Mina on the forehead of collaborators. While in the west,
Whoa.
Julian Sanchez, known as El Charro, led the self-styled Lanceros de Castilla.
Okay.
El Charro himself wore a French hussar's cap, its eagle symbolically turned upside down.
Ah.
There were dozens more bands operating across Spain, though a few were no better than bandits, terrorizing civilians as often as the enemy.
Yeah.
The guerrilla war was merciless,
Yep.
marked by hideous atrocities on both sides.
Yep.
A French soldier's greatest fear was to be taken alive by the guerrillas,
Yep.
who often tortured their prisoners before killing them.
That's war.
Tens of thousands of French troops were tied down by this people's war, guarding outposts or patrolling the countryside. The roads were so dangerous for French messengers that they required cavalry escorts of 200 men or more.
Wow.
Many still didn't get through, their valuable dispatches forwarded to Wellington, for whom they became an invaluable source of intelligence.
Yep.
The war in Spain would ultimately cost the lives of 240,000 French soldiers.
Wow.
As was typical in wars of this
Disease,
era,
sickness,
most died
yeah.
from disease,
Yeah.
but more died fighting guerrillas than in battle against the British and Spanish armies.
That makes sense as well.
However, it was the twin threat, a well-led regular army under Wellington and a popular insurgency, that left the French facing an impossible strategic dilemma.
Yep.
If their armies remained dispersed to fight the guerrillas, Wellington could attack. But if they concentrated to defeat Wellington in battle, huge swathes of the country would quickly fall to the guerrillas.
Yep.
This was Napoleon's Vietnam, or his...
That doesn't make sense. How can it be Napoleon's Vietnam if this happened before Vietnam? I understand what he's saying. That doesn't make sense, but okay. I mean, what would Napoleon do? Would he kick every professional army out of Spain and Portugal, out of the Iberian Peninsula, and hold it and deal with the popular uprisings, the guerrilla fighters, right? Will he do that? Or will he sort of retreat to like Catalonia, Aragon, Navarre and hold there? So he has a little breathing space between France and the enemies in Portugal and Spain. Right? Like, Maybe? Okay.
His bleeding ulcer, as he called it. A war that cost his empire an average of 100 casualties every day.
Wow.
With little prospect of victory. And in 1812, as Napoleon launched his gigantic invasion of Russia,
What?
Wellington and the guerrillas launched their own offensive that would turn the war in Spain on its head.
Makes sense. Coordination. That was awesome. Right? And we saw a little foreshadowing there. Well, not foreshadowing, but he talked about Napoleon invading Russia. Uh-oh. That could not be good. Why is he invading? I thought Russia was his ally. Maybe it has something to do with the continental system that no one likes except Napoleon. Right? Maybe, but Napoleon has built strong ties with the Austrians. Maybe because he married, I don't know if she's the daughter or niece of the Emperor of Austria. I don't know. But it looks pretty decent, right? Alright, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.